Good evening and welcome to the Bloody Scotland Book Club. It's officially for autumn 2023, but it's so bloody Scotland cold out there, I'm going to call it the winter meeting. So we have three fantastic books to discuss tonight. I'm Craig Robertson. I am going to host tonight's discussion, and with me is a panel of experts unrivaled in the kingdom. We have with us tonight Suze Clarke-Morris. Hi, Suze, who is a book blogger specialising, of course, in crime and thrillers, and one of the world's leading crocheters as well. Is it crocheters or crocheters? Crocheters.
Crocheters as well.
We also have Frankie Burr. Hi, Frankie.
Hi.
Frankie is the host of book events and festivals and does anything you want to do with a good book festival. Frankie is your go-to person. She is an ex-bookseller and dreams of touring the country, taking the word to all. Last but by no means least, we have Gordon Mcghie. Gordon has been a book blogger since 2014. He is been a judge on the Thriller Awards, Crown Thriller Awards, and he is better known as Grab This Book. How are you all?
Good,
thank you.
How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Tonight we are going to discuss three books. I hope at home you've read some of them, maybe all of them. We are going to discuss A Fatal Inversion by Barbara Vine, The Monkey's Raincoat by Robert Crais, and Squeaky Clean by Callum McSorley. All are award-winning novels. And we are going to start with Barbara Vine, which Frankie is going to discuss first with us. But first of all, a little trailer from a BBC series about A Fatal Inversion.
Don't leave me!
Just want to ask you some questions concerning your ownership of Wyvis Hall. Those remains were buried about 10 years ago. About the time Adam owned the house and decided to take his summer off.
Adam!
Well, be careful, Adam. Falling in love can be a dangerous thing.
Oh, the dead baby!
Did you forgive me? Forgive me anything?
Ruth Rendell's A Fatal Inversion begins tonight, 9:05 on BBC One.
We should perhaps start off by saying it will not be on tonight at 9:05, even if you're watching it in very, very late catch-up. Frankie, tell us about Fatal Inversion.
Well, first of all, I want to say that seeing that clip is quite strange because having read it, I had images in my head, and it's always the way, isn't it, when something is produced either for audio or visually. So that was quite interesting. They're all quite a lot better looking than they were in my head. So that was nice. But I think probably everybody will get the vibe from that this is a period piece. And it seems strange to say that for a book that was written in my lifetime. And so I'll give you a sort of précis of what's going on. Adam, who is only 19, inherits Wyvis Hall from his, great uncle, and ends up having a sort of what I would call a lost summer there with a group of other young people, some of whom he knows in advance and some he doesn't. The book itself weaves its way between 1976, which is when the crime, for want of another word, takes place, and 1986, when the people involved are reliving because of a discovery. And it sort of takes you forwards and backwards right the way through, weaving quite well. The Wyvis Hall is based in Suffolk. So there are lots, and obviously anybody who was alive then, many people watching may not have been, but those of us who were alive in the UK then will know that 1976 was a very hot summer. So there's a lot of that is very much part of the sort of background, not wearing many clothes and lying on porches and, all of that sort of stuff. A lot of drinking, a lot of young people just doing what they do of a summer. It's very difficult because I don't want to give anything away, but there are, it takes quite a long time for the action to happen, though it's going to happen. And you don't know quite who the action is with, but it does take you on a sort of a path towards what you think is going to be and who you think is going to be involved, in quite a well, definitely in a period way. I would say the thing that I would want to flag up to everybody first is that, and again, I don't know if this is because it was written in the 80s, Barbara Vine, obviously known as Ruth Rendell as well, and this is the second of her Barbara Vine books. The language used and some of the initial way people are described, I think people would struggle with now. And I think that took me a little bit to get over. But once you get over that, if you like something that you can kind of put yourself into because you were that age at the time, then this is as good as anything. And obviously, Ruth Rendell, Barbara Vine, an epic writer of stories and twists and turns. And so I think certainly if you've never read a Barbara Vine, give it a whirl. You just don't know. But it was an interesting read for me. And I remember really enjoying Ruth Rendell books when I was about the age of all the participants in the crime. So it's quite interesting to feel it come back round in a circle. What did anybody else think?
Yeah, it wasn't for me. I found it too long, too slow moving. As you say, Frankie, it does take a long time to get to the action, and that was too long for me. I mean, it's really descriptive. It's really well described. The whole long hot summer is brilliant, but the characters I didn't find particularly likable, which would be fine, except I didn't care about them either. And so it didn't work for me because the characters weren't people that I wanted to care about. The good or the bad. Well, there weren't very many nice ones, really. In either period, they weren't very nice. There was perhaps one exception in 1986, but for me, I didn't care by the end. And so, yeah.
Because I think the characters obviously appreciated the entire story, and I think they must have specifically decided to make them.
We might be losing you there, Frankie. Not sure we picked you up there. I think maybe the volume had gone a little bit.
Can you hear me now?
There we go. That's better. Yeah. Let's come to the characters themselves in a minute and how that affected your reading, because I think that's quite interesting to go into. But Gordon, overall, what was your take on it?
I'm kind of favouring where Suze came from. It puts the slow in slow burn. When Frankie nailed it, it takes a long time to get to what's really happening. So there's a lot of character development, I would say, where you're skirting around, you're meeting all these people that, as Suze identified, they're not particularly amiable or likable characters. And you just feel you're waiting for something to happen. I don't know what it would be classed as these days with a psychological drama, but it was light on the drama side. It was almost like a play unfolding, but you weren't sure where it was really going. You know that someone's dead. You know it's in a big old house. That's fine. It's jumping forward in 2 different time periods. Okay, I can cope with that. So you get to see almost the after effects of consequence of their actions, where time has moved on from the incident that you don't know about, but you see the relative guilt and the repercussions almost.
So to explain, we start literally with buried secrets. We start in present day as it was in 1986, when a couple are burying their dog, and they're burying it in the pet cemetery. And what they dig up is, of course, human bones. And then we interweave that story with 1976, the great broiling summer, to what led to those bones being buried. But you all felt it took a bit longer to do that.
It does. I mean, it started with that high impact. You've suddenly got an unexpected discovery in a graveyard, which is a nice way to introduce a book. But then it kind of threw the anchor off the back, and you're like, okay, well, where do we go from here? And we went slowly forwards, very slowly forwards. I did like the way they introduced it, and the Pet Cemetery thing was something I'd never heard of until roughly the same period Stephen King did a book called Pet Cemetery too, and they were all the vogue. But it had that feel of people not like me. It was a very different society of people. It was wealthy, well-to-do. In the main, there were a couple of misfits in the mix, but these are people who'd done well, and they were screaming Middle England at me for a while. And I just didn't really warm, as I said, didn't really warm to quite a few of the characters, because I just felt they were all quite distant. The conversations felt stilted. The book was written quite a fussy style as well. I've never been a big fan of Ruth Rendell's books, so I probably came in from the wrong starting point in that I've not really read many of her books. But I just found it quite fussy to read.
We think, Suze, come to you. Do you think, so it won the Imperium version won the CWA Gold Dagger, and would have been 87, I guess. Do you think we have a different perception of pace now than we did then, that we want books to move a bit quicker, certainly than this one did for you?
I mean, I like a fast-moving book, but I'm quite happy with a slow-moving book, as long as it's people I care about and the build-up means something. I just felt we were meandering a little bit with this one, or my feeling on it was, and it was very slow. So yeah, maybe, but I'm quite happy with a slow burn, as long as there are people I care about in it, and you know, I feel that we're going somewhere with it, and I just didn't with this one.
So what I found just on that, excuse me, it put me in mind, I think it's Lucy Foley's books, where her first couple of novels, there'd been a murder and there was a killer. Sorry?
The Hunting Party.
Yes, The Hunting Party was her debut. And that's exactly what it felt like. Something's happened, and you find out at the end of the book what it was and who the victim is and who the killer is and whatnot. But Lucy did it so much better and paced it better. And it's a very similar approach in that the Barbara Vine book. Something happened and we know what it was, but we don't quite know how it happened or who did it or who's involved. So it was very similar in that regard. So in terms of the pacing, you can do it, because Lucy Foley did it very well. I just didn't feel this one was quite as enjoyable to get to the end point, as it were.
It's an art in itself, Frankie, isn't it? And I think it was something that Barbara Vine and Ruth Rendell did very well, was that slow release of information, but maybe too slow, or maybe looking back, we think it's too slow.
And I do think it's interesting
Robert, you've gone quiet again.
I don't know why this is. Sorry, everybody. Can you hear me now?
A bit better.
New house, new internet. What can I say? So sorry. Now you've got me right in your faces.
No, that's good.
So I think we have moved on with our expectations of a book. I think a slower pace, though sometimes lovely, still has to have hooks and grab our attention in ways that perhaps of that period we were not looking for so much. Life wasn't so busy. You know, watching something on television wasn't as fast as it is now. Our whole being of cultural kind of entertainment was slower. And I think this reflects that. Also, I think it's quite interesting that the sort of Middle England bit, because of course listen to me, that's me. And so yeah, exactly. So I could connect in some ways with them. So I knew they were people I wasn't going to want to spend any time with. So although, sorry, excuse me, everybody, I've got a horrible cold. Although I could connect with them in terms of background to some extent, because they weren't nice people, you know, my friends were nice. My friends who were at that time were nice. Not everybody would have thought they were nice. I'm sure some of the time we were pains in the but we were pretty nice, and we're still pretty nice now. So that was quite difficult to connect with. And the pace, I think you're right about Lucy Foley, actually. It feels really similar, and I stupidly hadn't thought of that connection. But there are an awful lot of similarities in terms of background, in terms of, you know, what people are interested in, etc., etc. But she keeps everybody much more on the edge of their seat.
Well, in terms of the characters, let's talk a bit about that, because it's quite a brave thing for an author to do, to make all the characters unlikable, because you then really got to deliver on everything else. If you're not giving them somebody, the reader, someone they like. And right from the off, so we have Adam, Rufus, and Shiva. And right from the off, we meet Adam, who is a racist.
Yeah.
Right, just obnoxious beyond belief. And it's an art in itself, I think, and a risk. So, Gordon, for you, how do you feel in this book, but also generally about unlikable characters? I say this as someone who's written plenty of them.
Yeah. And that's interesting because Lucy Foley's hunting party, there was a generally a cast of quite unlikable characters too, so maybe that lends into the narrative as well. But I struggle if I don't engage with at least one or two characters I can empathise with and root for almost. I don't like bullies. Now there are bullies in this story, but it's not a story about bullying. But as soon as I'm into a story, there's a negative character. It's a character who is overtly a bully. In this case, we've highlighted there was a racism element as well, came in very early on. You just instantly your back's up and you're like, no, okay, no, you're dead to me. Who's next? And then nobody came forward to take that mantle of someone I would actually get behind and look forward to reading their involvement in the story. So I think you need something to cling on to, and I didn't really feel in this particular time there was anybody who I really wanted to read about.
Suze, the same kind of thing to you. How do you feel about a lack of likable characters? Oh, Suze, you're muted. Maybe. Yeah. There, you're fine now.
Oh, okay, sorry. A really unlikable character I often love because I'm invested in what they're doing. Do you know what I mean? So, the baddie of the story, for instance, I'm completely invested in, even though I don't like them, or more than that. Here, I just didn't care enough about any of them. So, yeah, there was nothing about them. There was not enough about them to hook me, in their unlikableness. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
it does. Yeah,
we've talked mostly about the men involved. So if there are 3 lead men in the book, but there are also a number of women who are crucial to the story, and they equally are not very likable, but for very different reasons. And I think it's quite interesting if I look back to that period in time, and I was in London at the time. What were the women like that I was spending time with, and what were the men like, and what was the racism like, and so it did make me question all of that. So I got engaged in that way, but not in the story, if that makes sense. I got engaged in the wider cultural issues, but not in the story.
It's good that you had that connection, because as I say, it was slightly out of my time a wee bit, not by much, but I just couldn't really connect to those people of that age at that time period. I came along maybe 5 or 6 years later than that, so it was just a bit removed. But it's definitely going to be a bit of a Marmite story. Once I got to the end and found out what the reveals were, I was actually quite intrigued by it, and I think I'd like to have known some of those earlier, because there was some really good hooks in there and things I think actually, and I would also highlight potential trigger warnings. There's a couple of quite sensitive subjects in there too, so I'd flag that up as well without spoilers. A couple of quite difficult topics were tackled, but I think finding that out right at the very end, there's going to be a lot of readers aren't going to get to the very end, to be fair, and I think I would like to know. I'd like to know a wee bit more where it was going.
I'm trying to find a win here before we all
Well, I think the win is that some people will be able to place themselves alongside some of these characters, not with them, not be them, but perhaps alongside. They might have known people who were this entitled or obnoxious or whatever. And I think the other win is towards the end. I do think there are some really great twists that you are sort of anticipating, but just don't know when they're going to happen or how they're going to happen or who's going to be involved. So I think if you none of us should struggle reading a book, should we? We shouldn't keep going if we're not enjoying it. But actually, I think if you are somebody who has a bit of tenacity about them. And you like the pace with which Ruth Rendell / Barbara Vine writes, it's worth a go. It's worth a shot.
There's a perseverance payoff. It's really well revealed.
There you go. That's our win. It's that you might be a bit slow from what we're expecting now, but keep with it, and the twists are there, and there's a payoff. And we have some comments. If anyone is watching and wants to comment on any of the books, put a message in, and we'll read it out. Sharon Bairn says she's thinking this is maybe not one for her, perhaps a bit too much description and slow burn. Yvonne Stanton says that she found it too slow and didn't like any of the characters, so that's a kind of common theme. However, saving the day is Sue Monroe, who said she enjoyed this book just as much as she did when it was first published, and it brought back memories. So, Sue, we are going with you on this one to see us through. We have two. It's odd, isn't it, to think of 1986 as almost a historical novel. Yeah. Let's not think about that at all. But we can come bang up to date with our second book, which is Squeaky Clean by Callum McSorley. Barbara Vine, for very obvious reasons, was not able to read a piece of her book for us, but Callum has kindly done so, and we're going to see a piece of film from him right now.
Niall started trudging home to Sight Hill, a mission away. He rehearsed what he would say to Heather, how he would break it to her that he hadn't always been Fred Niall, printing supplies salesman, business owner. When he met her just under 3 years ago, he was fresh out of jail with a new identity and a clean slate he bought by cooperating with the cops. Cooperating was what the police called grassing up your pals. He came to where the M8 skirted the Royal Infirmary. The speeding traffic sounded like a rushing waterfall. He wound his way up the footbridge that arced over 8 lanes of 50-mile-an-hour tarmac. The parapet of the bridge was panelled with graffitied grey steel that rose above head height, creating a gloomy trench with buzzing, sodium vapour lamps spaced out between pools of darkness. His footsteps bounced and reverberated in confusing ways, every clack of his heeled shoes pinballing away from him in both directions. As he came over the hump of the bridge, he saw a man under the grey light of the lamp at the far end. A hood hid his face in shadow. The blade in his hand flashed orange-yellow. Niall's heart thudded. He fell ill with the sudden onslaught of adrenaline. He'd been plugged once back in the day. It was pain beyond anything he'd ever experienced before or since. In the years following his stabbing, he built it up into a phobia. Just the sight of the knife was making his skin crawl, his legs freeze up. He recalled the sickening, unnatural feel of the blade being inside, the pain worse than anything he thought possible. The sound of footsteps ping-ponged off the steel plates of the parapet, not his own, and not from the man ahead, who was staying put for the moment. Niall spun around, another hood heading for him, cutting off his way back. This one was carrying the kind of meat cleaver used to butcher cattle, the handle big enough to be held two-handed. The hood at the far end had started coming for him too, moving quickly now, footsteps clanging and reverberating. Niall turned this way and that. He started in one direction, stopped, turned the other way, stopped again. He might cough his heart right up. It was so high in his throat, he felt if he opened his mouth it would be visible. A vague warmth spread down his legs. The river of running metal swept past below. He could hear the motors, the wheels spinning. He jumped at the wall and got his hands on the top of the parapet, scrambled with his feet until he got his head over it, then one leg up, hanging right on the edge. The traffic was a blur of light, a tsunami of noise. They were running for him now. He didn't know how long the drop was to the road, but if he hadn't felt so queasy from his bursting heart already, the height would have done the trick. Though he wasn't actually thinking about whether jumping was survivable or not, or whether, even if it was, how many cars would hit him after he landed. None of that was in his head. Everything was pushed out by the sight of those flashing blades, imagination choked, overloaded by the vision of them biting into his skin, hacking down to his bones. Heather wasn't in his heart or his mind as he fell, only fear, and then it was gone.
Oh, that was fantastic. It's a school night, so Callum's probably not still up at this time, but if he is, thank you very much for recording that for us. That was fantastic. I'm only joking, obviously. Suze, you're going to lead us off and talk us through what you thought, first of all, was Squeaky Clean.
Yes. Well, we're certainly not in Middle England anymore. This is very much Glasgow set. Poor wee Davy Bennett, working away in the car wash, trying to do the right thing, trying to get access to his daughter. He's given up all the bad stuff that he used to be involved in, and he's working his socks off at the car wash until he forgets about a court appearance to sort out access with his daughter, and only is reminded half an hour before. So just decides that he'll take a motor from the car wash, just borrow it to get to court on time. Unfortunately, the motor he decides to borrow belongs to Paulo, who isn't a very nice man, and it all kind of just goes wrong from there. It's fast moving, it's bloody, it's violent, it's full of blood and soap suds, really. There's lots of bleeding, lots of cleaning. It's a bit of a riot. It's very manic. Lots of fabulous characters. We talked in the last segment about unlikable characters. Paulo McGuinn is a really unlikable character, but you are very invested, or I was very invested in him. He's fabulously described, almost in a cartoonish way. There is an awful lot of humour, despite how dark it is. The dialogue is all in the Glaswegian vernacular. For those of us foreigners, or this foreigner, it took a little bit of getting used to. I've lived here long enough to be familiar with most of it, but there was still some that caused me pause. But I really liked that. I liked the realness, the grittiness that added to it. There's a policewoman in it, a very unpopular policewoman with her ex-husband, her children, and her colleagues, following a rather huge mistake a year earlier. D.I. Alison Crais. So you can imagine the jokes around that, and I think she's heard them all. So as well as Paulo being on his back, poor old Davy has D.I. Crais and a sinister chap called Croker. And his meathead. So there's so much going on, and I loved it. I loved it.
Gordon, something very, very different from Fatal Inversion. In all senses, really. What did you make of it?
Much better than the first one. I had a full start on it. I started it, stopped it. Didn't come back to it for far too long, so I had to restart it and just ploughed straight through. Just got totally caught up in what was going on. Really enjoyed it. I liked Suze's note about the Glasgow vernacular. I mean, even as a almost Glaswegian, Lanarkshire doesn't quite count. I had to really slow down, take in, make sure I was understanding what I was reading. But it was nicely done, nicely pitched. It didn't feel forced. Sometimes you read Broad Glasgow and you think, oh, really, but. No, it was, I thought, perfectly pitched in that regard. And it was just fun as well. I know that you were saying it's bloody and it's violent, and there's some really, again, trigger warnings. There's some disturbing scenes in this one too. But I didn't feel it was OTT. It did feel there was a level of gangster violence in there, which, yeah, you could actually believe that could actually happen. But for me, the standout was the car wash. I just thought it was a fabulous setting for a book. And the fact that most of it pivoted around the car wash itself rather than a police station or, on the streets down the pub. It almost took on like a character of its own right. And I thought, that's just brilliant. What a setting. And the variety of stuff that comes and goes and passes through it. Genius. Really, really enjoyed it.
Good. Frankie?
I enjoyed it. I am looking forward to the second book with D.I. Ali McCoist. I kind of want to know a bit more about her. That was how I was left with the story. I loved the Glasgow vernacular. And in fact, having recently had to leave Glasgow, I really enjoyed getting stuck back in. And I think it's terrifying how much language I seem to know now from my Middle England seat. But also I loved the descriptions of place. I could really put my, and I don't know whether some of that is because I am not there anymore and miss it, but I could really picture absolutely everywhere that was being described and talked about, whether they were the sorts of places I might have ever spent any time in or not, was sort of irrelevant. I could absolutely put myself in those places, hopefully not with those people, but I could put myself in those places. Yeah, I thought it was a really great first book, and I am looking forward to seeing where we go next. But I am particularly keen to hear a bit more about D.I. Ali McCoy's and her dog, actually.
It's an annoyingly assured debut. I think is how I would best describe it. Because we've all talked about it, so let's talk about the dialogue. And I think I haven't asked Callum this. I wish I had when I had the chance, but it's quite a brave thing to do, to put it in, because you are taking a risk. And because if you don't get it right, you can mess it up. And I think he has got it right. But it's a tricky thing to do. I've used local dialect, and I've also not used it, and it's much easier not to do it. It's quite easy just to write in English and use local words, but putting stuff in dialect is tricky. So I applaud him for taking it on. Gordon, you're the nearest to being a local.
Middle Scotland.
There's a danger of making a reader stop and work out what things are. But I also see it as it's missionary work. I think it's taking a great language and spreading it a bit further afield.
Yeah, and there's definitely a very vocal presence at the moment to get Scots language and the Scottish dialects recognised, and they can be commended for that as well, and not let's make it accessible for everybody straight away and use the King's English, as I suppose it is nowadays. But it gives it that almost authentic voice, because you don't have people who work in car washes who are educated and they have dialects, they have language, they have slang, and to not represent it in a story detracts from the story you're trying to present. So, as we said, Callum's carried it off brilliantly. You do have to. I mean, I'm quite a skim reader, so I have to slow down. I have to take in what I'm saying, because it's not my natural dialect. Although lots of the words I can't use are. So it just gives you, if you go up. I mean, if I live in Airdrie, which is quite unglamorous. If I went out and walked down the street, I would hear people talking like that. So when I'm reading a Scottish crime thriller, it won Bloody Scotland McElbanny Prize this year for Best Scottish Book. These are the voices that I'm surrounded by on a daily basis almost. So it felt right.
So, because one of the issues I've had, if you write Neds or taxi drivers, you can't have them speaking like they're walking down Oxford Street. They do speak differently. So for authenticity, you do want at least a measure of dialect.
You do, and I think what you're talking about being brave. I mean, it's almost all the dialogue through the book. Almost all the characters are these kind of folk that are the people that we're seeing on the street. It's colourful. I love the Scots language. I love some of the words that I'm not going to say we use, because I use them just in an awful English accent. So it's very colourful. It's very descriptive. So it's fabulous to see. I did wonder whether it would limit appeal sort of further afield, but I've certainly spoken to people who, American and things, who were surprised how much they understood.
Okay.
I don't know, but a lot of it is contextual, but for me, it's such a colourful language. There are so many brilliant words in it. I love to see it.
Frankie, does it do that? Does it bring the book to life by giving it that injection of colour?
Yeah, I absolutely think it does. And interestingly, now I find myself, at least temporarily, back in Middle England. I have a copy of the book, which my neighbour was rather keen to read. And she is Somerset through and through. it'll be really interesting to get feedback from her about how she finds the language. I almost think it's sort of easier, perhaps, if you were an American or something, because you're already invested in being in Glasgow in that moment. But perhaps if you are in the rest of the UK, you have slightly less, perhaps, awareness or something. I don't know what it is, but it's very odd. So it's going to be really interesting to see how she takes it. And I also have to say, it was really lovely hearing Callum read it then. So to hear him read it in his own voice was something that I think was really special, actually. But I think it's a cracking book, and it's what a great way to start.
Yeah, as I say, annoyingly good, I think. The thing that really brought the book to life was the characters for me. Characters who just kept making really bad decisions. So both Davy and Alison Daly both got things wrong again and again, Suze. But you were invested and you were on side with them.
Absolutely. You're on side with Davy the whole time. But there are so many other fabulous characters as well. Sean, that owns the car wash, who just sits and smokes weed all day, and swears and gets angry at people. And Tim, who also works in the car wash, who's slightly posher and a student, and just the whole different. So, but also the baddies. I mean, there are so many of them because there's meatheads, and everybody is so well described. You can absolutely visualize them. I mean, I had no problem imagining what Paul McGuinn might look like.
Yeah.
So I was as much invested in them as I was in Davy and Ali McCoist. Davy, he's just a wee soul that made, as you say, made really bad choices.
Yeah.
Trying to do the right thing, doing the wrong thing as a result. So he, just stuck by circumstance to a degree. But he was just a wee soul, and I was rooting for him the whole way through.
Gordon, what about you, characters? So you was that what brought the book to life and made it work? Was the investment in those characters?
No, it was more the story than the characters this time. I was just fascinated by where it was going. The characters were incidental, and I'm not very good at remembering character names, so Ali McCoist, although it took me out of the story sometimes, it's easy to remember. As you say, Davy was just hapless and a punching bag for a lot of it, but it was just, where was it going? That's what I really wanted to know. What had been the issue that had caused Alison to be such a failure? Why was she getting hauled over the coals? Why was it all going wrong? I needed to know what happened when Davy made that decision to take the car, and then things went wrong for him, and his problems snowballed as well. And I thought, I was like hooked. It was like watching a car crash it was like watching a car crash in slow motion, because I just wanted to see where it was heading. And then when you realised what the ultimate end goal was, and again, no spoilers, where the ultimate destination was intended to be from the character's viewpoint, I was like, right, let's go, let's do this, let's see it happen. So although I enjoyed reading Davy and I wanted to know more about Alison, I was frustrated that I couldn't really get to warm to her quite the same way. I needed to know more about her to really get that involvement. So for me, Davy sang more than Alison did for a large part of the book, although towards the end it plateaued out and evened out a bit. I'm intrigued enough to come back to see what happens next for her and her insane dog that she needs to train better. But yeah, for me, it wasn't so much about the people, although they really did enhance it. I wanted to know where it was going. I wanted to know what the destination was. So it was interesting. Just, it's not normal for me to do that. I usually get hooked on the characters.
Frankie, it can be a pretty brutal book in places. Callum looks so innocent and yet so dark. How did the violence and brutality stand out for you?
Where does he find that stuff? I'm really worried about what's going on in his head at night. It is, if you don't like blood and guts, this is going to be a challenging book for you. It is very violent. And actually, I'm pretty good on all of that, but there were moments where I just had to put the book down briefly and go, oh, okay, perhaps that's more than I needed at that point. But that said, it is what drives the story and the characters. So I think it is probably very important. Again, I don't know. Yeah, I think yeah, there are definitely warnings flashing up all over this, and
Yeah.
if you don't like violence, you need to still read it, but just as soon as you get to the violent bits, skip on a few pages because you'll get the gist of what happened without having to deal with the visceral stuff. But as we know, as you know well, Craig, visceral stories, particularly visceral stories based in Glasgow, are we love them. We love
Thank
them.
God.
Enough of them. I know. So I think it is important that people understand that's what they're going to get, so that they don't get hit over the head by surprise by it. I think there is a justification for it. It'll be very interesting to see how he uses that in the next book, and whether any of the characters that are left standing, which are not many, by the end of it, reappear further down the line, other than D.I. McCoist. I want to agree that actually she doesn't really get a standing until towards the end. And that's why I kind of want to know a bit more about her. But
I suspect Callum's got a bit more in store
yeah,
for us.
exactly.
Quickly for Suze and Gordon, the juxtaposition between humour and the violence, how does that work for you? Because that is, again, can be a tricky thing to get right. Being funny while you're taking limbs off, Suze.
Yeah, and part of me thinks I shouldn't like it and I shouldn't be enjoying it, but I always do. It just, I like it dark, as long as there is some light. There has to be some light, relief, whatever that is.
Yeah, there's lots.
Yeah, and in this case, it's the humour.
Gordon, the humour worked.
The humour definitely worked, and I think without the humour, it would have been a very different book. As Frankie says, it's not cosy. It's not a cosy book. So, but it brings it away from gritty. It makes it more accessible. I think you can be dark. Dark and gritty is really like the extreme end, the dark end of crime fiction. And you've got cozy, which is cats and rainbows and
caffeine. Not cozy, maybe the understatement of it.
Not cozy, yeah. So I think the humour brought it much more mainstream, made it much more accessible, and it did make those scenes that make you flinch much more palatable, because it didn't soften the impact, but there was some light at the end of that tunnel, and it wasn't a car coming towards you. So
we've got a few comments online. Louise Cobbin says that she read the first 50 pages of Hospital today. Louise, I hope you're doing all right. And it has her wanting to read on. She feels the characterization, loves the scene description. Well done to Callum on his debut, for which we all agree. Yvonne Stanton says it's her favourite of the 3 books tonight. Initially, she struggled with the dialogue, but she was sufficiently invested in Davy's story to persevere. She can imagine the book wouldn't be for everyone account of violence and bad language, but I loved it. We all love violence and bad language. Sue Monroe says she didn't think she was going to enjoy the book, but she persevered and she couldn't put it down. Best book for the trio for her. Lindsay Lynn says she asked Callum if he made a conscious decision to use the language, and he'd said it wasn't a choice, it just came natural to his writing of the story. It obviously worked because it won the Makavani Prize, and worthy winner it was too, because I obviously want to keep on the right side of the Makavani judges. And everybody else. Right, our third book of the evening is The Monkey's Raincoat by Crais, by Robert Crais. I need to be a bit more formal to begin with. And Robert has recorded a piece for us. I'm going to hear that now.
From The Monkey's Raincoat. It was 8 o'clock when I pulled into the carport. I put the eggplant in the microwave to reheat and ate the antipasto while I waited. Oily. Sonny's had gone downhill. The little metal hatch I'd built into the door off the kitchen clattered, and a cat walked in. He's black, and he walks with his head sort of cocked to one side because someone once shot him with a .22. I poured a little of the wheat beer in a saucer and put out some cat food. He drank the beer first, then ate the cat food, then looked at me for more beer. He was purring. I said, "Forget it." The purring stopped and he walked away. When the eggplant was ready, I carried it and the beer and the cordless phone out onto the deck. The rich black of the canyon was dotted with jack-o'-lantern-lit houses, orange and white and yellow and red in the night. Where the canyon flattened out into Hollywood and the basin beyond, the lights concentrated into thousands of blue-white diamonds spilled over the earth. I liked it. I'm in a rustic A-frame on a little road off Woodrow Wilson Drive above Hollywood. The only other house is a cantilever job to my east. A stuntman I know lives there with his girlfriend and their 2 little boys. Sometimes, during the day, they come out on their deck and we'll see each other and wave. The boys call my place the teepee house. I like that too. When I bought the house 4 years ago, I tore off the deck railing and rebuilt it so the center section is detachable. I detached it now and sat on the edge of the deck with my feet hanging down, eggplant in my lap, and nothing between me and the great empty space of the canyon below. The chill air felt good. After a while, the cat came out and stared at me. I said, "Okay." I poured some more of the wheat beer on the deck. He blinked and lapped at it.
I must admit, I like the cat a lot. Gordon, that was the first in the series of Bob's much-loved Elvis Cole and Joe Pike novels. Tell us about it.
That was a real treat, by the way. I loved hearing that. He's got such a lovely voice to listen to. Monkey's Raincoat, as you say, the first in the series with Elvis Cole, Joe Pike. I've got to be careful because I keep wanting to say Joe Cole, who was a footballer. But I love these books. I mean, this is the first in the series. I loved going back to revisit it. Elvis is a private investigator. His friend and partner in business is Joe Pike. He's kind of the strong, silent type. Very, very big on hanging around the gun range and shooting lots of things. And in this story, which as you heard from the clip there, it's set in Hollywood. So we're off to leaving Glasgow behind, off to the warmer climes. It's a Hollywood, it's set in the late 80s. Elvis Cole, as I say, is a private investigator. It's written in the first person narrative from him, which I always quite enjoy as well, because you're only getting his take on events. But 2 women come to see Elvis in his office. One of the ladies, her husband has disappeared and her son is with him, and she's looking for Elvis's help to recover them. And things snowball from there, shall we say.
Things take off from that point. And again, much like in Squeaky Clean, some bad decisions are made and things go wrong. Frankie, let's come to you. What did you make of the Monkey's Raincoat?
So I enjoyed it. I think I must have read at some point another one in the series, and wasn't aware of that until I was a little way through this one, actually. As is often the case with the first one of a series, it takes a little while to kind of position yourself in it, in terms of what you're taking from it. I thought it had, so again, it's that thing. I think I must have in the 90s, early noughties, gone through a phase of reading American LA-based crime, because there are all sorts of descriptions in there that made me think of, somebody else, another detective / PI's house in the Hollywood Hills or wherever. So I sort of quite enjoyed that, but I had to kind of pull myself back out of that a bit to refocus. The women are quite annoying. Again. And again, because it's set in the 80s, I've got to be honest, there's a certain amount of sexism and misogyny that is rife, which is probably appropriate for the time. But again, we've got quite used to not being quite as bad as that anymore. So I struggled to find my place in that. That said, it's a cracking story. So once I'd kind of got through, in the same with Barbara Vine and dealing with some of the racism issues and that sort of thing at the beginning, once I'd realized I was just going to have to deal with the misogyny, that was fine. I was able to sort of slightly switch that off and just enjoy it for the sort of, I'm going to say, romp that it is. It's not really a romp, but my brain is a little bit foggy, as you will have all gathered. Not quite sure what the right word is. But yeah, I enjoyed it. I think what it'll do, it will make me go back and try and figure out which one I'd read, because weirdly it's Joe Pike, the silent partner, who I sort of remember from something else rather than Elvis. So I sort of need to figure out where that's come from. So I'm looking forward to exploring that.
Yeah, the relationship between the two evolves as it goes on, and I think that's what really carries the series is the relationship between the two of them. It's so strong, and this is the beginning of that. Suze, what's your take on the book?
Yeah, well, this was my first book by Robert Crais, and I loved it. I raced through it in absolutely no time. It's fast moving and lots goes on, and I loved Elvis and the story behind his name and all of that. I know what Frankie's saying about misogyny, but I found that somehow easier to deal with in this than I did with the racism, particularly in the Barbara Vine. I don't know, maybe just because I was enjoying the story generally more here, that was more acceptable somehow. I liked the way he writes, or I like the way he writes, in that it's very simple. This happened and then that happened. But somehow the way he writes it, then it paints pictures, even though it's not flowery or descriptive, or, we listen to him there talking about heating up the eggplant, but we can all picture that, and the balcony and the cat lapping up the beer. So yeah, I find the writing really straightforward, but somehow really, really descriptive, and it painted pictures. And his descriptions, certainly of people's faces, were just to die for. Just wonderful.
Yeah, I'm pretty envious of the writing style. It's very different from mine. So there's a scene towards the beginning where Elvis is in Russia and LA, and anyone who's spending time in LA will know it's the worst place in the world for that. And I might have spent 5 sentences describing how it was, and the entire sentence is bumper to bumper. And it says everything that you need to know. It's just done. And I think some of that is Bob's past experience as a scriptwriter. So he can take a few words, and they do a lot of heavy lifting, and they can really invoke a lot with that. Gordon, what did you make? Lord, staying on that, on the writing style, and that, and the prose, and that sharpness of the wit.
The wit is where I was going to come to. It's just so accessible. We touched on the humour in Callum's book previously, and Elvis is a wisecracking, fast talking hero. He's got a comment for everything. He's got a witty comeback, and that's what you want. You want a character you can engage with. And this one, it was very much about the characters more so than about the story for me. So we're doing that flip back again. But yeah, he's got a really fluid, easy, accessible style. He has that one more chapter vibe, where you get to the end and go, I'll just do a wee bit more. I'll just do a little bit more. And that's, as a reader, that's all I want. Just keep my attention and keep me going. And because it was lighthearted, albeit with there's drugs and there's violence and there's kidnapping and there's people die, these are not easy topics again. Hollywood in the 80s, it was very much drugs and violence for what you can understand, but you just want to keep going. It's fun. It's a fun read, and not enough books are fun to read.
There's no issues with pace here, Frankie, compared to Fatal Inversion. Very different.
No. And actually, it was the fastest read of all three, without any question of a doubt. Almost too fast, in that once one started. Actually, as you say, there was one chapter that, got to read the next one, got to read the next one, got to read the next one. So it's almost over and done with before you perhaps absorbed it all. But that is a sign of a good read, isn't it? It's certainly something that you can easily see people kind of going, right, I just need 24 hours out. I'm going to lie on the sofa and I'm going to read a book, or I'm going on holiday. I need something that I'm not going to have to battle with or put myself into, or any of those things. It's a and every now and then we all need to do that. Even those of us that read all the time, sometimes we're reading things that we love and sometimes we're not. It's work. It's bloody lovely work. Bloody Scotland, lovely work. But sometimes we need something that we can just switch off and let it just happen.
Yeah.
And I think this is one of those books where,
Yeah.
as long as you like crime books, you are easily going to find yourself curled up on the sofa with a cup of tea and not moving until you've finished it. And that's a luxury. Actually, that's a really nice luxury.
If people don't like crime books, they've come to the wrong place.
Yes, exactly.
They're tuned into the wrong thing. Suze, it's hugely entertaining.
I think it's just a safe pair of hands. I mean,
Yeah.
I've read quite a lot in the series. I don't think I've missed any. I maybe missed one or two on me. I've never not enjoyed them. He's just a go-to. I'm going to love this. I know I'm going to love it before I even pick it up. And again, as a reader, you want that. You've got some go-tos. You think, I'm going to enjoy this book because of who's written it. And Robert Crais for me has always been one of them. I was delighted I got a chance to introduce him on this, and then nobody had recommended him in one of the previous sessions because he is one of my favourite ones to read because they're so much fun. And and it's not just humor. There's great stories behind it too, but they're just enjoyable.
Yeah. So one of the things, if you're going to write a long-running, successful series like this, then the characters have to be absolutely crucial to the whole thing. They not only have to be invested in them, I think you do have to like them if they're going to be a long-running series. And so Elvis and Joe are what carries it.
Yes, and Elvis is a lot easier to like than Joe, but Joe, well, just because he is the strong son, we don't know so much about him. He doesn't talk. He does talk, but not very much. But I could picture him, and I was bereft actually when I finished this because I don't have any more in the series and need to rectify that because I just wanted to carry on and see that relationship grow, find out more about how it came together and find out where it goes. And so I was totally invested by the end and need to sort out.
One of the things that's always fascinated me and I admire is that Robert Crais has been offered time and time again, I can only imagine, a lot of money to have the series dramatized, made into movies or TV. And he's always said no. He's turned it down every single time because he doesn't want to mess with what you guys have as readers in your heads. He doesn't. And I think that's a really admirable thing. I think, money talks for me, and I'd say yes. But what do you think? Is that it? Would it change what you thought? Gordon, you've read them all. It changed what you thought of them?
I probably wouldn't watch if that was the case. I would probably avoid it because I have in my head I know where they are and what they are, and it's very rare I'll watch a dramatization of a book I'll enjoy because of that. I don't watch a lot of TV and video as it is, so maybe I'm not the best person to ask. But yeah, I know exactly how Elvis and Joe look, and whoever they cast, it wouldn't be them. But I'm sure they would. The material's so good. I'm sure they'd do a good job of it, and I'm sure it'd be successful. I quite like the fact he's dug his heels in and said no.
Yeah, me too. I think it's hugely admirable. Frankie, what do you think now in the business of adaptations and how they mess with your reading of it?
So I do watch an awful lot of crime drama, and I enjoy it. Sometimes more than others, obviously. I find obviously if I've watched something, I can't read the book because I know who's done it. So it's really important to have read things first. And then I approach adaptations as though they were new and not the book. I think that is the only way I can do it so that I can keep the images and characters that I have in my head. So, there needs to be a certain amount of time has lapsed between my reading the book and an adaptation. It would make a cracking series.
Of
But
course, it definitely. Yeah.
I think, you know, to not go down that path, very brave and really great actually, because I think it's so easy right now, and crime has such a high profile, both for the original books, but also for the dramatizations, that it would be terribly easy to go down that path. And actually, you know, it is lovely that here is a series that hasn't been messed with.
Yeah, I think it's a great thing. The danger of Suze is getting it wrong. Then it really can ruin a beautiful thing.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I watch a lot of crime dramas, but I've probably read the least out of the four of us going back. You know, I was quite a late comer to crime, but but I think, Frankie, you're right. You have to just see it as a separate thing. I mean, Titus Welliver is not how I ever imagined Bosch. However, I love watching him being Bosch. Love it.
Yeah, they're different things. Absolutely.
Yeah. But he's not how I had pictured Bosch. But that doesn't detract from my enjoyment of either.
No, the books will always be the books. Yeah,
TV.
and they're going to exist on their own. We have some quick comments, if we could. Going back to Bob's reading at the beginning, Effie Merrill says, powerful reading. I need to read this with a big exclamation mark. Lisa Gray, who knows a thing or two about writing crime novels set in California, says that Crais is the coolest crime writer around. She loves the Elvis Cole books. And Don Draper says, I read this when it came out, though not recently. She's read all of the books in the series, and she is a huge fan of Elvis Cole. That brings us to the end of tonight's discussion. Huge thanks from me to Suze Clarke-Morris, to Frankie Burr, Gordon McGee, all of you for tuning in. We will be back in the spring, which seems a long way off right now. 27th of March, we will be here. We will let you know what the books are going to be, who's going to be hosting on the Facebook page and in the newsletters. Thank you for tuning in tonight. And if you're on catch up, we'll see you next time.
Good night.
Bye. Bye.